Hello, Disruptive Technologists. Today I have with me Minerva Tantoco. Minerva's got over 30 years of experience in innovation as a founder of 2 startups and just a pioneer in mobile technologies. Most recently, she served as New York City's first ever Chief Technology Officer, appointed in 2014. She was the director of Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation. And she also launched some really groundbreaking initiatives in smart city policy and government tech. And she helped New York City become named as the 2016 Best Smart City at a Global Smart City Award, Global Smart City Awards. And she's named a 2016 Distinguished Fellow of Bard College, Athena Center of Leadership Studies. And
yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Did I get that right? Yeah. And Minerva is currently, and she serves on the board of New York Hall of Science and the board of trustees of Vive Tech. And she's currently an entrepreneur investor and is a frequent speaker at AI, blockchain, and IoT topics. And with that, our illustrious guest, is there anything that you would like to add to that, or anything?
Sure. Just one thing, which is I just recently completed teaching a course at Columbia's School of International Public Affairs, the graduate SEPA program, one of the capstone workshops on smart and equitable strategy development for the Bronx, working with the Bronx Community Foundation, on how to develop, fund, and implement smart and equitable city strategies for the fantastic Bronx.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty inspiring thing to work on, but also probably very fulfilling. So thanks for sharing that. So I think I want to go ahead and get straight into it. I want to start with tell us about smart cities. What is a smart city from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because when I first became the inaugural chief technology officer of the city of New York, smart city was not as much in use in the U.S. It was really just getting started in parts of Europe and Asia, and I think at the time it was almost a sort of technology focused approach to cities. How do we make technology, work in municipalities and city governments and so forth. One of the things that I wrote about probably like 6 months later was an article called "How Can We Make Cities Smarter and More Equitable?" And I think New York City was one of the first leaders in the smart city space to think about how do you actually use technology to not only make cities smarter, but actually more equitable, and not provide smart technology only to the privileged few, but how do you actually use technology to make the lives of everyday New Yorkers better, safer, faster, more efficient. And sort of that equity slant, I think, was a big contribution that New York City made to that whole dialogue about smart cities. But broadly, I think smart cities now is defined as multifaceted. So one aspect is sort of civic engagement, right? How do you make cities more participatory and using social media or other forms of engaging in civic dialogue that technology makes easier now than just going to an in-person community board meeting. Another aspect is, of course, that with climate change, how can you use technology to make cities greener? So the decision to use all electric vehicles for city vehicles would be a smart city approach, right? Reduce pollution, be more energy efficient. That's a smart city technology approach. And even inside city agencies, the notion of a smart city is, how do you make it easier to do business with the city of New York? Get a permit, or get start a business. And then finally, there's sort of the economic component of smart city, which is of course the advent of the technology industry as a major financial force and tax base for city municipalities. And so, how do you encourage and grow um, the economic development of a city with the technology industry, let's call it, and industries that heavily use technology? And that has components not just in economic development, but also education. How do we grow the next generation of innovators and the next generation of tech workers, right? And how do we become a hub for innovation and attract venture capital funding, as well as the talent, and growing that talent as well? And so there's so many facets to it that I think now it has, since 2014 when I was first appointed, there are now sort of subsections of smart city that have grown on their own, into their own sort of movements. So there's now green cities, and civic hacking, and modernization of government agencies. All of that started as that initial concept of a smart city.
It's like, as I'm hearing you, I'm thinking about, there's some elements to that which is in traditional city planning, but like what really seems to be the difference is the leveraging of technology systems, but also like we have capabilities due to that we are now looking at how do we actually build cities that are created from this, on that.
Yeah, it's really sort of a very creative and continually evolving space. I mean, when we were defining it for City of New York for the first time, it was an incredible privilege, because we had delegations of foreign governments coming to see what we were doing, and through that had a tremendous impact. So a quick example would be the Internet of Things guidelines that the City of New York published, and it was really a kind of practical response to the fact that now city agencies were buying smart tech, smart waste baskets, smart park benches, right, and putting LinkNYC on city streets, and yet there was no real guidelines on how should those be procured and maintained, and what are some of the contract. Like, I'll give you an example. If you had a regular waste basket, you don't need a privacy policy for that. But if you've got a smart waste basket, you probably do need a privacy policy and a maintenance policy, and and a security policy, right? And because if it's and so where the existing contracts and systems were for things, now if these are connected things, there's a whole layer of contracts and governance. So what we did was we gathered 27 different organizations, everyone from IBM to the ACLU to other city governments, gathered together probably close to 500 different sort of guidelines and principles, and whittled them down to 5 main categories. And we just made them available for city agencies to use as a way to help guide, what are some of the things you should be asking that you wouldn't ask about a regular park bench, but you might ask about a smart park bench that counts the number of people that are using that park, right? And so that became the IoT guidelines. It's still there. It's at nyc.gov/IoT. Once we publish them, now over 35 cities in 11 countries have endorsed New York City's guidelines. That was something where it was an entirely new aspect of smart cities that we were able to to create, a helpful set of guidelines that other cities also found very useful as well.
So with that, like, with those experiences, is there anything particular like that you're most proud of? You know, definitely here, like the guidelines are a big part of that.
Sure. I mean, there's two that really stand out in my mind. And both had been started in the previous administration, but it was bringing them over the finish line and making them readily available. One was LinkNYC, which is those free Wi-Fi kiosks you see on the street. And that came out of a question of what do we do with all the payphones? And a lot of people don't know that the payphones are really a concession granted to the payphone company to use public space, right, to create a publicly available service. And I am in New York, as you can hear. And so I just love, I just can't get over, I'm still in touch with the people that worked with the city on the project, and we just marvel at the fact that we could walk down the street and point to something. We changed the city landscape, and I just love when I see people charging their phones and using the Wi-Fi. It just makes me so happy that it was something that we were able to do, and that if instead of putting coins in a phone, you can just make I see people making free phone calls on it, and the fact that it's paid for by the ads that show on the side, which is actually how the old payphones work, right? If you know, all the old payphones had these paper wraparound ads. So we didn't change that model, we just made it digital. And so I think, it wasn't easy, and there were many, things that we can continue to refine on those, but that is one that I see every single day walking around the city, and just makes me really happy. The other one is the Computer Science for All initiative, because I went to all New York City public schools. I went to Bronx Science, I went to PS20 and Flushing, Queens, and so the fact that we were able to pull together public and private stakeholders in the Department of Education, and kick off the idea that you can make computer science education available to all New York City public school students, the largest public school system in the country with 1 million students. That's another one. And because it started in 2014, 2015, we're now seeing some of the fruits of that, right? The people that wouldn't have had access to computer science education and now entering the workforce with skills and a chance for well-paid jobs. Again, we couldn't see it then, but we're seeing it now, and now that's being run through the Fund for Public Schools. And I just spoke with someone there who said, "Thank you for doing that. Look at what has the fruits have of your labors look like, and it's people with economic opportunity."
That sounds very fulfilling and exciting. Just to see to be able to see students go down that road. So like sort of getting a bit to your own personal path. I imagine there's a lot of adversity you must have had to overcome in different moments. Is there any particular, like, what was it like to actually, take on this role as a CTO of the city? The first ever to do it, like, what were some of your barriers that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think I mean, my personal story is that I always knew that I was going to become a doctor. Um, and but when I got to college, as a pre-med and started using computers for some of the work, I realized that that was really the thing that I wanted to do from now on. And that's how I got into artificial intelligence, which was the notion that you could make computers think. Just really intrigued me. And originally my approach was just to use computers to become a brain surgeon. And now I was using computers to make brains, right? And I thought that was pretty cool. And so while still a senior in college, like many people in the 80s, started a company in Silicon Valley that was based on artificial intelligence and sold that 5 years later. And so that was my initiation into technology. And it was such an exciting time because in the mid 80s was when the first wave of just computing, because personal computing was invented. The notion of computing as an everyday activity was just happening then in the mid 80s. And to sort of be at the forefront of that was tremendously exciting. Um, as far as, I think what's funnily enough, what's sort of gotten me through many of the challenges, any career has challenges, but I gotta say, being a New Yorker is like the best preparation for anything you want to do. I'm quite a New York centric person and the biggest cheerleader here, but it really is such an incredible place with a high concentration of talented and driven and smart people with that smart and tough people, and that is just an incredible environment for innovation and an incredible environment for opportunity, and that notion of making it here is why people are here. And so in the New York City public schools, I was really exposed to all levels of people from every country. Like in first grade, people put a little pin from where they were from. And I remember just seeing a global map with pins in every country, and just thinking, wow, this can't be true almost anywhere else. And just the kids you grew up with were like people from people from all over the world with every possible reason to be here. And I think that is just incredible, um, an incredible opportunity. I think I was possibly lucky in a way because in the 80s, computing and AI was so new that actually like the gender differences were not as marked. Over time, there are fewer women than there were in the 80s doing computer science. And then this sort of image of what a technologist looked like or what a developer looks like really changed. We've all seen the movies, Hidden Figures, and computers were like actual people, mostly women, computing things. That's where the word came from. And then it suddenly became, a different image. I think similarly, in science, it's a similar thing in the New York Hall of Science. And I love the idea that we have an opportunity to say, look, computing is everywhere, science is everywhere, and you do it every single day now, and it belongs to everyone, And so that's what keeps me inspired, And it's one of the reasons it was, I made what people would say an interesting career move from being a finance tech exec. I worked at places like Fannie Mae and Merrill Lynch and UBS, and worked all over the world. And they're like, why would you become, a government worker, essentially? And it was because it really did provide a platform to inspire others that this is a really great career for women, for people of color, for people who are creative and driven and smart and want to solve problems and who think creatively about problems. That was an unparalleled opportunity to inspire others to take on science and technology and engineering and math.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like, I see that, you can't take the New Yorker out of you. Like, that's just part of your story. And, but also, you got in the field early and you were able to, you really established yourself and you really did you know, you really did the work then.
I'll tell you one quick story though, which I tell a lot, but it's a newer audience, which is after about 10 years in the industry, I got a chance to get my first CTO title, right? at an advertising agency, and this was in the late 90s. And remember, the web just started becoming more popular in the mid 90s, and at the same time, I found out I was going to have a baby, and I thought, oh no, this is my first time as a CTO with this crazy idea that this internet might have some impact on advertising. Crazy idea, right? Um, and should I do it? And I remember, talking to someone, and they were like, if you were a man, you wouldn't be asking this question, right? You would just, of course, you're going to be a great CTO and you're going to be a great mom. Like, why are these two things, either or? And for me, that was such an important conversation where I hope to be helpful to others as well. That sometimes it just takes that random bit of, of encouragement to say, that you shouldn't try to limit yourself, that you can, that sometimes these things may be imposed on you by society, or you may impose on yourself, and you should be fully willing to question those things. So yes, and I ended up launching websites, and my daughter was born, and she's going to be 23 next week, and you know it all turned out okay.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great note for us to conclude on, because I keep asking questions for hours. I can. There's a lot of things I'd love to dig more into, but I think that's maybe a different conversation at a different time. So just thank you so much for taking the time to be here to speak with us. I know you're going to be on the panel in July, right?
And cybersecurity, which is another great topic for everybody to
Yes.
hear about. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're all going to be looking forward to that. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Hassan. Great to be here.